Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar this morning. We're going to go ahead and get started with our session, but before I leave the housekeeping page here, I just want to point out that you have all entered this session in auto mute mode, so there is no communication. However, at the end of the session, there will be time for questions and answers if you have any. If you notice on your GoToWebinar control panel, there is an icon for you to raise your hand. That will enable me to unmute you so that we can hear your question. So if you do have any questions, feel free to ask them at the end of the session. Our session this morning is with regards to the practice management piece of the Denali upgrade, and this is actually part 2. Our practice management upgrade is being conducted in 2 sessions. Part 1, we are dealing with the payment side and the statement side of the changes, and in today's session we're going to look at the claim side as far as changes done on the billing screens where relevant, as well as some of the AR follow-up screens that are now customizable, and the new user interface for reports and graphs. The first thing we're going to look at is just a real quick label change on the user interface on your home page. This is to bring the practice management homepage into consistency with the changes we made on the EMR homepage. The label change is simply that instead of the word nurse, you will now see clinical staff, and that is based on user profile. So the logic is the same. It's going to let you know the patient routing for that visit over in the EMR side. You just will no longer see the hard-coded word nurse, as you see here outlined in pink at the bottom. Instead, it will now show as clinical staff. Now, getting into the feature changes on the billing side, the first thing we're going to look at is create claim new by encounter type. Now, typically the default behavior in the practice management side of prognosis is that the claim is auto-generated from EMR when the encounter is signed off and closed by the provider. However, there are instances based on your workflow and your specialty where claims need to be created from scratch, where there is no corresponding visit in EMR. So you're able to just do claims new directly here in practice management. Well, the database structure requires an encounter type be associated. And previously, when you would do create claims new, the encounter type was blank, so you always had to explicitly choose one. So what we've done now with this upgrade is it will always default to system encounter type DB for dummy bill. And that will be applicable for both professional 1500 as well as institutional UB04 claims. Now you do still have the ability of choosing an applicable valid encounter type. So in the pick list, if you notice here the number 2 bubble, you will still be able to choose from all of your predefined encounter types. And in that pick list, you will see in parentheses the claim type. So when you're using a literal encounter type, those are specific based on how they're configured, whether it's going to be professional, institutional, employer, DME, etc. But when you're just creating a claim from scratch, it will now default to dummy bill, so you don't have the extra key clicks unless you want to use them. Also, with regards to claim creation and encounter type association, when encounters are created on the EMR side for use in the scheduling module, the duration needs to be greater than 0 to be an actual visit type. And previously, that also was a limitation on the claim creation. So again, if you were creating an encounter type for the sake of billing only, and it did not really incur a visit in EMR, they were being created as a 0 duration, so they weren't showing up on the schedule. Also, that was not creating the claim, however. So that has now been remedied, that even if it is a 0 duration encounter type, it will still allow you to create a claim, except in the condition where that 0 duration encounter is created by the system, such as a refill request or a SureScript refill, where based on the activity, the system generates a 0 duration encounter, but it's never otherwise used. Those still will not incur a claim because they are not relevant in the billing side. Also, system level encounters that are reserved by default as a no claim encounter based on the claim type indicator, such as merge history, face sheet history, those also will still not generate a claim. But if you as a human individually generate an encounter type in your master file and you do not assign a duration, you will be able to generate a claim. This is typically for the situation where you have an HL7 interface in place with regards to lab and you need to bill the lab service, but you're not actually scheduling for it. Another feature that now has been moved from strictly at the billing level up to the EMR level, so we do actually cover this feature in our EMR webinar sessions as well, is with regards to the government, non-government CPT code requirements. The default logic is defined at the encounter type level. If you notice the number 2 bubble here on the right-hand side, when you go in to define your encounter types, there is a checkbox called Medicare. And when that is defined, regardless of the insurance, it would assign governmental CPT HCPCS if that is a requirement. That logic, it will still be there, but it's lower in the priority because now we are going to look at the insurance first. If there is a claim filing code that indicates government versus non-government, that will supersede in determining which CPT or HCPCS gets put on the assessment and therefore put on the claim. Now, in the existing logic, some clients may not be using this at all on the EMR side because they feel it's strictly a billing function. So as our blue bubble there at the bottom indicates, you may have crossover codes in place or scrubber checks where based on the AR group or based on the claim filing indicator, you're getting a scrubber check at the point of marking your claim ready to send. You can continue to use all of that logic. This function does not require you to make any changes. However, if you would like to start it up front so that from the point of arriving that patient through the auto claim creation, everything is correct, both on the assessment screen in EMR as well as on your claim, and therefore as a biller, you don't have to take the time to fix it. That is now going to be based at the insurance claim filing level. Going to the claim details page now in billing, there are 2 new labels added on your I button down at the bottom. It will now display your claim creation date as well as the encounter close date. Oftentimes the biller needs to know that information when they're completing these additional fields. So those will now display there, and they are read-only fields. They will reflect the most recent activity, meaning the most recent time that claim was created. In other words, if you did a reopen and a rebill, that's going to show the rebill date, not the initial claim creation date. And the encounter close date again, if it has been reopened on the EMR side and then reclosed. This would show the most recent reclose date. In the normal workflow where your claim is auto-generated in conjunction with closing the encounter, these should correspond to the claim that you're working on if it got auto-generated from EMR based on those activities. Sticking at the claim level here on the claim details page, we've added the stethoscope icon in the upper right to your claim level icon row. This allows you to directly open that claims encounter in EMR from the claim page. This does not require any additional special permissions at the user level. So if you are in the system as a biller, as far as your user profile, you do not require EMR access or the ability to toggle to EMR now to view the encounter. Plus, you can do it in a single click of the stethoscope icon. And then when you're done reviewing the encounter, if you click your back arrow in the upper left, it will return you straight to your claim. This saves you a lot of additional key clicks and extra searching in the system now without that stethoscope. Now, previously, we did add this stethoscope in our last upgrade to your account screen. So it is still there, but we have also now added it in addition to the claim page itself. We've also added it to these other menu options. So when you are under your claims menu processed or any of your AR follow-up, outstanding, assigned tasks, you will also have the stethoscope. So you can very quickly toggle between the visit for that claim and then come back to your claim in a single click. Going down the claim details page into your charge section, we've added a new denials button. Now this denials button reflects a patient's denial history from their account level. If there are no denials for this patient, this button will be grayed out. But when the label is white, as you see in this example next to my number 1, that means that there is at least one previous denial for this patient. When you click the button, it opens up the denied charge history in a pop-up screen, which we see here at the number 2. Now, please note that even though you're on a new claim, you're working a current claim, this is going to be based on the patient's claim history of all previous claims in a billed status, but only those that have a denial. If you notice back on my top screen example next to the new denials button, you already have the claims history button. That remains unchanged, where it gives you all claim history for the patient, denied or not denied. This is going one step further and filtering it to only denials. So in conjunction with working the new claim today, you can perhaps be proactive and prevent a future denial, because if you review the previous denials, it may be a scenario that today's claim actually includes, and you can go ahead and fix it before you ever bill that claim. So this is informational, and it is going to show every claim that has had at least one denial, and every denial within every claim will be present, including the EOB details where that EOB denial came in. Also on the claim level, when it comes to generating a letter, when you click the letter icon, and that invokes the letters out user interface that you see here, in the upper left where you're able to select and address your letter to, there's some new options added in there. This also is available on the EMR side. There is now a total, I believe, of 47 different contacts that may be associated to your patient, where the email, fax number, address can pre-default. Now that of course requires that the vendor master have those details. So if you're trying to generate a letter, for instance, to the insurance adjuster or to the attorney, and you've got that associated through the case management, or in the case of employers with workman's comp or whatnot, we've added all of those additional indicators to make it easier for you to address your letters. We've also added a sequence indicator. So if you see next to the number 2, there is a new icon for assigning the sequence, and in the case of more than 4 attachments, you will also have the red paperclip. So in this example, next to my number 2, you are seeing both of the new icons. That paperclip will only be there, however, if you've attached 4 or more. And then the paperclip will open up another little pop-up that itemizes all of those additional attachments so that you can sequence them. Typically, when you go in to attach something to a letter, either through EMR docs or billing docs, they come into your letter attached based on the way you chose them. And sometimes you want them in a different sequence so that when the patient receives it, or the attorney or the insurance, whomever you're sending it to, then the attachments are in the desired sequence. So that is what this is allowing you to do, is modify the sequence of the attachments. Now at the system level, there's a logic change or enhancement for IPA and capitation claims, if those are applicable within your practice. The default logic in the case of IPA and capitation has always been primary insurance only as far as billing, so we did not allow you to add secondary or tertiary payers in those instances. And then when the primary payment came in, the scheduled process just did a blanket automatic write-off of the balance. And in many cases, that is still valid because that is typically the default behavior of a capitated contract or an IPA plan. However, there are instances where there are carve-outs now based at the CPT level, the HCPC level, the payer level. So we've added these new properties that will allow you, if you're under that scenario, to define the CPT or HCPC codes that should not be written off. And because of that, you are now also able to add secondary or tertiary payers. So that if there is a scenario where the capitation payer or the IPA plan doesn't cover a certain procedure, but the patient has other insurance that will, you will now be able to do that. So you can indicate the codes you don't want written off, add that secondary or tertiary payer for the sake of generating the claim. You also can define a number of days to prevent the automation write-off from happening so that you can make these decisions. So these are new properties that by default will not be defined. So within your practice, if you have these scenarios, however, As a biller, if you have the administrator access, you will be able to set these property values accordingly. Now, leaving the claim details page and looking at the system level claims menu, there's been a modification here. In your existing version, as you see here on the right-hand margin outlined in pink, when you go to process claims, you have a sub-menu, and you can then choose claim level or charge level. That sub-menu is now gone, so when you choose processed, if you notice here on the left-hand side in our Denali upgrade, next to your filter, we have added a pick list where you're able to choose claim level or charge level. So this is not a functional loss. It is a simplification for you so that once you set your predefined filters, you can toggle between claim level or charge code level without having to go into a separate menu option and redefining your filters. So this basically is giving you two layouts within one window to help you easily toggle between the two views. Other claim-related changes within the system, and this first bullet point of insurance eligibility enhancements actually was released in a patch in your existing version, so you don't have to wait for the upgrade to get it. However, we were not doing webinars in conjunction with that patch, so many clients may not be aware of it, so we are reintroducing it now at this point. So this is something you could go ahead and take advantage of now if you're not already, instead of waiting for the Denali upgrade. What this upgrade was to the eligibility module is you have the ability now of identifying, based on a property you define, certain data elements under patient register that you want to auto-update when there's a discrepancy. So maybe the patient has given you wrong information and the insurance has different details, or vice versa, of course. Prognosis may be right and the insurance wrong. So it gives you the opportunity of making the decision when there's a discrepancy. There's properties, of course, that I mentioned that allow you to define the specific data fields, and then if you want the update to occur automatically or if you want to see them on a report and manually make the change. Also, the eligibility identifies when the payer is enacted for the specific date of service you're validating for. Also, at the claim level, when you mark your claim ready to send, or when you are trying to remove a CPT HCPCS that has otherwise been referenced, it is no longer going to allow you to delete it so that it is preserved for data integrity sake. And there is new validation for not otherwise classified codes that require comments. Previously, that would be hard-coded at the government payer level, but now if a commercial payer also requires you to include comments for a 99 code, the validation will catch those. We've added additional scrubber check operands for the case management and employer billing values, as well as some additional claim indicators on your funnel for when you're setting your filters. And as noted at the bottom, if you need to know specifically the new funnels, the new operands, the detailed release notes will include those. So those are the system level claim-related changes. Now the next feature we're going to look at here is an enhancement to the employer billing workflow. Some of you may use employer billing, some of you may not. If you are using it, we've enhanced the workflow to where it is a complete accounts receivable workflow now from billing through adjudication. If you've never used it and you're interested in it, the employer billing was developed specifically for practices who bill employers for their services rendered, meaning they don't bill the patient, they don't bill the insurance. This is typically for ACMED or any other specialty where you do employee health, new employee drug screening, things of that nature. It does require setup on the EMR side at the clinic and counter type level, as well as the vendor employer master level. Employers need to be defined in the master, and your encounter type needs to be specific for employer billing, because this is a different billing workflow. It does not generate a CMS 1500 or an EDI claim. It does not go to a clearinghouse. It also is not just routed to a patient statement. It has to generate an employer invoice. So that is why there is specific encounter types required. The impact then at the claim level is each employer can have a custom fee schedule, which would be predefined in the employer master vendor, or by default, it will use your usual and customary fees. As a biller, you mechanically work the claim in the same manner as an insurance claim, meaning there will be scrubber checks that you can define. You will still validate all the data and then mark it ready to send. So we have added new scrubber checks specifically for employer billing requirements. The employer invoice screen then has also been modified for those of you that may already be using it. There's new columns of data. You also now have the ability when you schedule the job to email the invoices instead of printing them only. And along with that, again, in your employer master setup, you would need to have the federal tax ID number because that serves as the employer's password for encrypting the PHI. And then whoever you designate in the practice would be notified when the invoice is available. Now, the final bullet point here, there is also a brand new employer portal, which you can open up to your employers. That is not covered in today's session. There is a separate session with our Denali Upgrade webinars that deals specifically with portals. Now, as regards your setup, again, I mentioned that encounter types are specific for employer billing, and you'll see there the claim type does need to be specified as employer claim. And this will ensure that the appropriate workflow is triggered when the claim gets generated. Other than defining that specific encounter type, there's no change in the workflow on the EMR side as far as the appointment, the arrival, the claim creation for you as a biller, as long as the appropriate claim type is defined. Within the employer master, which is under configuration vendors, in addition to the employer name, of course, you would need to make sure that there is a valid email address. Also, the federal tax ID number is mandatory, and the fee schedule type may be set unless you want it to default to usual and customary. Now, typically, this is going to be defined during implementation. So if you are an occupational medicine specialty or another specialty that utilizes employer billing, this should already be defined and in your workflow. And it's not something that you do on a daily basis as a biller. But it does have to be set up one time for each employer, and then it's there forevermore to trigger this behavior. The one point I want to mention up there at number 1, for your registration person, they do need to make sure they're choosing the employer out of the master file. They do not want to just simply free text in the name of the employer. Also, some employers utilize third-party administrators to process specific pieces of the claim. So you have the ability of associating your TPA to the employer level as predefined in the TPA master. If you notice the number 6 bubble, we've also now added the employer account screen, which is employer specific. That behaves very much like your patient account as far as being an overall transactional history. It's just specific to the employer. Invoice template can be specified, and of course when it comes to templates, there are different requirements or preferences at the employer level based on whether or not they use TPAs. Do they define their invoices at an encounter type level, at a job level, and so on? So all of these specifics are defined at the employer level. And this is where you associate the TPAs. Now, if you notice at the bottom, the TPA master is a separate setup. So you would have to generate the TPA first, and then this is inside the employer screen where you associate the TPA and what specific charges that TPA processes for this employer. This is the employer account screen that you access through that account lookup icon. Again, this very much mirrors your patient account, only it's at the employer level. So you're going to have for that employer their invoice history, their payment history, the tracking of payments through advanced utilization, and so on. The third bullet point here I want to mention, and we're going to get into this a little bit later here in our session for your patient account screen. These screens are now customizable. So if you would like to customize this screen based on the default factory of what you're looking at here, contact technical support, or of course create a ticket directly through the Resource Center, and they can get the customizations for you. So once the employer billing setup is accomplished, we're now going to look at the actual workflow as a biller. On the claim details page, again, you're working the claim mechanically is no different than any other claim. There's 3 indicators here, though, that visually will let you know this is an employer claim. First of all, number 1, and this may visually be a little bit of a confusion for you, it will start off as the payer self-pay dash employer. And that is because actually this workflow is kind of a hybrid between a patient workflow and an employer workflow as far as our general ledger management. And since the employer or the payer is a requirement, that is why it is going to show that way. So you won't see the employer name as the insurance. It's going to generically say self-pay dash employer based on that claim type indicator in the encounter type master. But then number 2 and number 3 on your screen is where you will know the specific employer and whether or not the employer invoice should be generated. When you mark the claim ready to send, then instead of, again, getting a CMS 1500 or an EDI claim through the clearinghouse, you're going to go under the Send Employer Invoice screen. This is where you're going to select the template, and it will default to the one you've predefined in the Employer Master, but you could change it at this level if you so desire. You can add a dunning message if you want, so that before you print it or email it, that message would be included. Now that top 2, or those top 3 sections there are what already exists if you're currently using this module. The number 3 item is brand new with the upgrade. You are now able to delete invoices, provided the invoice has not previously been billed or paid. Maybe you generated it in error, you wanted to make some changes or whatnot, so you can now delete them. So after you build the claim to the employer, now, of course, you're going to receive payments. And the employer receipt screen has been enhanced to now allow advance. In the existing version, the receipt was straight cash, and it had to balance as far as allocation against the total amount. And there was no ability, or there was an assumption that employers did not overpay or that an employer would give you a credit. And that has since been enhanced so that if an employer does overpay or pays the wrong claim that's really not part of this invoice, and there's a credit amount, you can now move that to advance. So just as we have patient advance and insurance advance, we now also support employer advance. And with regards to the allocation of the advance or the advance utilization tracking, just as we covered yesterday, or in our first session, you may not have attended yesterday, we discussed the advanced utilization tracking at the patient level, where it goes to the source. We also have that here at the patient level, or the employer invoice level. So when that source payment comes in, up here, if we notice in the upper right, the allocated amount is less than the total payment. So there's an amount that's getting moved into the advance bucket. That advance then can now be utilized immediately if you so desire within your workflow. And the movement of that money, again, is going to look just like moving your patient money. You're going to have this new line called advance utilization. When the advance exists, the allocate advance hyperlink will become available to you so that you can now decide where you want to apply that credit amount. If you're not going to move the money to another balance and you want to refund it or write it off, we've also now added those functionalities. So under your remittance write-off, you will now have employer as an option, and also under remittance refund, you can now do employer refunds. So those are 2 new features also with the Denali upgrade as regards employment payment or employer payment. That makes it a complete workflow now. Now moving out of specifically employer billing and getting back to system level changes, we're going to shift now from claim level to AR follow-up level. We now allow you to customize your screen for the assigned task, the outstanding claims, and patient account. Those are the 3 most frequently used screens when you're wearing your follow-up hat. A blanket disclaimer for these customizations. You do have the ability to do it on your own if you so desire. If you do not have a comfort level of working with quote-unquote programming code, you can always contact technical support, and they will gladly customize it for you. But there are 17 columns by default on your assigned task screen. And you now, with the ability of customizing it, can remove columns that you don't care about if you don't want to see them. You can resequence columns from left to right so that you're not having to scroll over to the right to get the valid fields that you want to look at. So you can make this screen now suitable for your workflow. This is system-wide. So if there's multiple collectors within your practice that use this screen, you would collectively need to decide on the sequence, of course. But at least you're not strictly limited now to the default layout. So there are 6 new properties that accommodate this. And again, if you do have to have administrator rights to make these modification changes, but if you do, you can try to make the changes on your own, or again, call support. Now, the changes you can do, you can rename the columns. So if you want the claim to say claim number instead of claim ID, or you want it to say simply name instead of patient name or whatever, you can change even that, just the labels on the screen for the columns. You can resequence the columns so that they're in a different order on the screen. You can widen or shorten the column width to adjust your screen real estate. And you can remove a column entirely. Excuse me. If you are going to remove a column entirely, it of course would no longer be available for you to filter on or define in your funnel. So you do want to use that with discretion. Similarly as your outstanding claims, it is the same logic we just discussed as far as being able to tailor it to your liking. It is a different set of properties. Each screen is controlled by different properties. So even though the default out-of-the-box layout is the same, it is 2 different screens. So if you want them to now be the same, you would have to go into both sets of properties and make those changes. But you can also have them now be different. So that's entirely at your discretion. And then that brings us to our patient account user interface. Now the patient account screen, which of course is the quote-unquote financial Bible, where at a patient level you have all of your transactional history, claim-wise, payment-wise, write-off-wise, and so on. Some of these labels have been modified. For instance, responsible person now says guarantor. We've added some additional links to the zoom area where you're able to quickly zoom to look at those different sections such as credits and deductible amounts and write-offs. Also down in your claim ledger, notice the number 2, we've added case number. So those of you who do case management, the case number will now be visible for you without having to go under patient register to figure that out. And then to your activity table, we have inserted a totals row. Continuing with the patient account screen, just as we mentioned on the other 2 AR follow-up screens, patient account can also be modified. Now there are 2 new properties that support this. So the modification here is a little different. Those other 2, you could actually rename the columns, resequence the columns, and so on. Well, your patient account screen is not just columns of data. This is actually embedding tables of data, sort of like taking different Excel spreadsheets and like a jigsaw puzzle, putting them on the screen in the way you want them. So there's simply a property called patient account sections where you define the sequence of the entire table. You also have the ability, though, of hiding columns. So for instance, if we look here, the top example is your default view that you currently have. And the blue, green, yellow columns is primary, secondary, tertiary balances, employer balance, patient balance, collection agency balance. Well, maybe in your practice, employer billing is not applicable, so you don't want to waste the real estate on your screen of having that column since it's always empty. So you can now remove it. So if you notice here in the bottom section, I have removed the employer column and the collection agency column. Now, the patient account sections is with regards to the tables of data, such as your claim table, your penalty invoice table, all these different grids where you have a lot of columns of data specific to that particular transaction. Well, with your upgrade, you are going to have new predefined tables available. Now, these tables are going to be available, but by default, you will not see them on your account screen. So you do have to decide if you're going to want to use them. This is part of the customization open to you now. What we've done is your tables that currently are combined, such as your credits table right now includes insurance remittance, insurance credits, patient remittance, patient credits. It's all a single table, and you're having to bounce up and down. Here's the example of that. Number one at the top here is what you have now. You have a combined table that includes all of these transactions. So when you're trying to troubleshoot, you're kind of bouncing up and down, looking at the document number to determine by the prefix, this is a patient receipt, this is an insurance receipt, this is an adjustment. So these new tables allow you to segregate those if you so desire. Now again, this is all based on your workflow and what you want. So the number two example shows you how you can break out the insurance payments separate from patient payments. So it makes it a little easier when you're troubleshooting. So that is why we've introduced these new separate tables. Now, in addition to that, you also have the ability of defining reports. So whether it's a standard report in the system or even a custom report that you create, it shows you here within the tag how you define the property, that you want the billing report or you want the collection report added. Now, typically those reports, of course, are system level, which include every patient within that category. When you embed this report to your account screen, it will be auto-filtered to that patient only. So this gives you a great deal of flexibility now in making your account screen suit your workflow, because you can sequence the way these tables appear. You can separate them out into individual components. You can add custom ones. You can remove some if you don't want them. Another change to the EMR patient or to the patient account. In the upper right, we have added the EMR documents icon. Currently, you can only access those through your claim letter attachment. This now allows you to access them at a patient account level without having to toggle to EMR, without having to have EMR permissions. So when you're on the account screen, if you click the EMR document icon, as you see here at the bottom, you get a pop-up of the patient's document list without having to go to EMR and look at it. Now this is read-only on the billing side. So if you're going to want to do utilities as far as renaming the document details, generating a compilation, a combined zip file, you will have to still go to EMR for those utilities. But typically here at the billing level, you're just wanting to look at the documents, maybe print them. So that is what you can do. However, especially in conjunction with the new employer portal workflow, or even on the patient portal workflow, if you want to share documents with your patient, with your employer, if you have this new user role, you can share these documents. We cover that in a little more detail in the EMR webinar because that's typically going to be handled on the EMR side. But if you have that user role, you will be able to do that here at the billing level as well. So now moving out of specific patient level claim and AR follow-up, we're going to look at system level changes. And this is with regards to your reports and your graphs. There's a new single screen user interface design, which gives more speed and efficiency in generating the output and some improved customization with regards to runtime settings. First of all, with regards to your aging report, and this would be applicable whether you're running it as patient aging, insurance aging, employer agency aging, or collection aging. In the lower left of your aging parameters, there is a new checkbox called Run in Background. Because aging sometimes takes a long time to generate, especially if you've been a client for longer than like 6 months or a year, you got a large number of patients who has a large number of AR history, then it's going to take a while to generate this report. And without it running in the background, if you try to generate the report, this screen stays up with a little hourglass that says processing, please wait, and so you can't really use the system for anything else. So now if you say run in background, it'll just automatically minimize and run in the background so you can go ahead and use the system. Specifically here on patient aging, there's also been a label change, label only, not logic. So from non-statement and statement, and now we'll say not suppressed or suppressed, meaning if you use that financial code to suppress statements from generating. Insurance aging, in addition to the run-in background, we've added a new drop-down for insurance responsibility. So it will default to all, meaning primary, secondary, tertiary, but you can also now get specific aging on each individual bucket. And then employer aging has added the ability and renamed based on what type of invoice you want to run your employer aging on. Now moving out to tabular reports, this is a major user interface change, both aesthetically as well as behaviorally. And this is exactly the same logic we've applied in EMR. So if you've already attended the EMR session, this is going to be repetitive for you. But if you're specific to billing, then this is going to be new for you. But what we've done is redesigned the user interface as well as your navigation for generating a report into a single screen. So you have the header section where you define your parameters and filter to find a report. And then under the splitter is where the detail generates and displays. And you can regenerate and refresh your data all on one screen. Whereas in your existing version, you have 3 different screens to accomplish that. And each report is separate. So if you decide to change your parameters and regenerate it to see a different set of data, you have to go all the way back to the beginning, choose the report name, and a separate pop-up define your parameters, and a third screen get your data. So we very much simplified that into now having a single screen, which gives you real-time updates. Across the top here, your top 3 fields, the logic already exists, but many clients were not aware that they can create a personal report catalog, which is at a user level. So we're just reintroducing or reminding you of that ability in case you weren't aware. The system has hundreds of reports by default, and sometimes they're not necessarily easy to find based on the way it's been named by programming. So once you've identified the report as useful for you and for whatever reason, you can rename it the classification if you so desire and save it into your personal catalog, and then that makes your filtering up here much easier. But by default, it will allow you to filter to all. And if you choose different classifications, the report name filter is filtered automatically to that classification only, so that you're not searching through hundreds of reports like you do now in this screen, where all reports are listed. So it gives you an opportunity to make the search a lot more user refined and tailored. Now, additional functionality for you at runtime, meaning when you generate a report. Excuse me. Number 4, you have the ability of freezing columns. Many of your reports will have lots of data, like an Excel spreadsheet. And sometimes as you're scrolling through that data, you want it to keep the patient name or the date of service or something locked. So you can now freeze those columns before you generate the report, and then you'll have the ability of keeping those static as you scroll through the other columns of data. 5 and 8 are period from up to or number of days. This lets you decide when you generate your report if you want it on a specific date range, today, this week, this month, a from and through date, or just a number of days. I want it for the last 90 days, the last 120 days or whatever. And you don't want to calculate, does that mean I go back to August 17th, August 16th, August 18th? Just say 90. Now, if you notice here, some of the fields will be grayed out. If the field is grayed out, that means for the report you've chosen, that parameter is not applicable. So all of these parameters will be enabled or disabled based on the specific report you've chosen. Number 6, again, this is a common one that will sometimes be grayed out, sometimes be enabled, and that's if the report has conditions associated. Maybe you want to generate the report by encounter type. So then this applicable title would say encounter type. The binocular would be enabled so that you could choose what encounter type you wanted or what insurance you wanted or whatever. But if it's grayed out, then that means you cannot specify that particular piece of data. And then 9 through 11, you can have the ability of hiding the PHI. That's really a very nice feature again in having this ability to regenerate data in real time on one screen. Maybe you're doing a certain project in the office and you need the PHI. So you would not hide it in number 9, generate the data, do your research, and then if you've decided, okay, I now need to print this for somebody or email it to somebody, but you want to hide the PHI, then you click Hide Identifier, regenerate the data, and it'll come out as X's in the output. Billing and patient filters will come and go again based on how it's been defined into your report query and if you want to use them or not. If you want to sort the data based on different fields in ascending or descending order, and then the comment section, either defined by programming or by yourself, you can put comments in there such as the purpose of the report. You've identified this is end of month, this is end of year, or whatever, so that when somebody is covering vacation or a new employee comes in due to staff turnaround, it's very easy to educate them on the purpose of a report. So that is, again, is something that you can modify if you so desire. All of those changes are also added to the configuration screen. Now this screen is just included in our webinar FYI. Most of you are probably not going to modify the report queries because it's kind of programming, so this would go through technical support. But this does show, for those of you who do create your own reports already, this screen has been modified to accommodate those new changes as far as default logic. Now the same design has been applied to graphs. Some doctors prefer graphs instead of type data. So you have the same user interface design change in one screen as opposed to separate screens. You have the ability of classifying graphs just as you can reports, and then that would default accordingly to what you can choose from. As we discussed in the first part of our webinar when we talk about our revenue cycle management dashboard, the Denali upgrade is coming with 20 predefined key performance index graphs, but of course you can add to that by creating custom graphs. When you run the graph, it will go by default based on how it's defined. As we see here with number 1, this is a bar graph. But again, in real time auto refreshing your data, you could change that to pie chart, to histogram, to line graph, whatever it is you want. And then the user interface, when you're viewing it on the screen, if you notice number 2, you have the ability of zooming in and getting a tooltip. You also have the ability of printing it, of course. And this would be your graph design, where you can go in and create custom graphs or custom gauges. You can assign the color coding. You can assign the labels on your XY axis and so on. And those are the different types of graphs so that you have an idea of which one you want to choose. So both your reports and your graphs are totally customizable. You can create your own or go through technical support if you're not comfortable doing so on your own. And you have the ability now in real time of changing parameters in one screen and getting the refreshed data. Now, we also have added a new type of report called management trend reports. And on your management menu, this is replacing the current drop-down option called dashboard, because as we cover in our other session, dashboard is now a system-level icon available for all users and not just under management reports. So we have renamed that label to trend and added this new level of management reporting. The trend reports are based on a scheduled process that runs automatically in the background, weekly and monthly. There's 2 scheduled processes that have been added. If you decide to run any of these reports then, and again, you've got some that are included with your upgrade by default, or you have the ability of creating your own custom ones. If you notice here in our screen example, the trend reports do both data and graph at the same time. Some users enjoy the data, some enjoy the graph, some want both. So the trends will be generated in real time, giving you both options. This, of course, is what the layout screen looks like if you're going to customize, and you can choose, again, the graph details that you want embedded into that report. Now, if you create a trending report without defining a graph, this would give you the data only. But if you want to include the graph as well, then that is when you would come into the layout and add the graph you want included. And this screen here is just included FYI for our discussion. This is what will be set up by default in your upgrade. These scheduled processes run automatically at 12 a.m. Pacific time. For the weekly trend, it will run every Sunday at midnight Pacific time. And for monthly, it will run every last day of the month at midnight Pacific time. And again, these are just automatically scheduled for everybody in the background. If you want to use the data, you can. If not, no biggie. But the data will always be there if you want to use it. And the different trending, of course, again, is going to be based on whether you create a custom or the ones that are predefined here, such as appointment and encounters, if you want to see the trend based on the date parameter as to how many appointments become encounters, how many are no-showed. You know, maybe you want to evaluate payments and adjustments at a charge level. It's whatever type of analysis you're trying to perform based on historical data. So this isn't like a real-time productivity report. This is after the fact. Maybe you want to analyze last month or last quarter. That's why we're going to automatically be generating the data. Now, of course, this data auto generation is only based on your Denali upgrade forward. So just because we're adding this feature now, you may not be able to go back to 2008 or 2010. All right, so that is the extent here of our webinar today. Once the upgrade has been scheduled for you, you will know when you log into the system 7 days out. After entering your user ID and password, you will get this pop-up that informs you what day you're scheduled for the upgrade. If you have any questions, of course, you can contact technical support, but please note that technical support does not do the upgrades and does not schedule them. Neither do we in education. They're scheduled through our engineering upgrade team. Once the upgrade gets applied, one of our new features, in addition to the functions themselves, is these first-time user experience bubbles. These are pop-ups that just summarize in 1 or 2 sentences what the feature is, just to let you know that this is new to the upgrade. When that pop-up occurs, you have hyperlinks to either hide it for that session only, meaning you'll see it again when you come into the same screen, or if you say, don't show me again, you're never going to see that pop-up again. At some point, we may also be embedding videos into these pop-ups, so there would be a third hyperlink that says play video. Once the upgrade has been applied, when you come into work the next day, you will notice this new bubble at the top. That displays for 30 days to give you access in one click to the detailed release notes. After that bubble disappears, or even while the bubble's there, release notes are always part of your system help. Now that we support different levels of modules, if you notice here on the lower right, your practice management notes are color-coded in the purple column. So if you do go under the Life Preserver icon to open help and you choose release notes, then you will want to go under the billing release notes to view them. And as always, we have our resource center. There's the video drop down. We do have a recorded version of this webinar available if you need to replay it. Also, under documentation user guides, you can get a copy of this PowerPoint. So those would be the additional tools available for you now. Okay, so that is our presentation for today. Do any of you present have any questions? If so, you can raise your hand on the little control panel. Okay, I'm going to wish you all a good day then and good rest of your week, and thank you for attending. Bye-bye.